they're basically desperate at this stage. I don't think they anticipated um, the amount of resistance that they're getting, not just with the truckers in Canada, but now that's starting everywhere. And there's been an awful lot of resistance consistently, which the press doesn't cover, in virtually every city throughout Europe. It's I mean, the problem we have here is that Klaus Schwab is an academic. And I can tell you with the academics, what they do is they sit around, they drink their port, and they talk among themselves in a five-star hotel lobby, and that's it. I mean, they never step out and talk to the people because we're too stupid to actually have an opinion. They know better, and this is what Schwab does. And he is far more sophisticated than people realize. And he has methodically gone out, created his young global leaders, and he's been sticking people in government positions that are basically loyal to him. So, I mean, like Trudeau, he brags about this because he thinks it's actually something good. It's not that he is Dr. Evil or something, and wants to, destroy the world. He thinks this is actually a step up, and they don't understand human nature. I mean, the last time this was attempted, by Marx, it led to the death of over 200 million people. I mean, this is, absurd. And I should point out that the real difference was that back then, serfdom had just ended in Russia in 1861, about when slavery ended in the United States. But serfdom in Europe had ended in the 14th century. So Russia extended for a much longer period of time. And then when serfdom ended in 1861, the people owned nothing. All right, so they didn't own any land. And so this idea of let's go get the rich, and because they control everything, it at least made more sense then. Because the average person couldn't even own a plot of land to grow corn. So, that was the real issue. And that's why Marxism succeeded in at least, creating the Russian Revolution, and then also in China. But people don't realize that you cannot have equality and at the same time human rights. I mean, if you're not free to think and create something yourself, then it's not, that's not what communism is about. I mean, the famous kitchen debate, which you can Google, was Khrushchev and Richard Nixon. And he was showing the American kitchen and all the appliances that we have. And the difference is that when people are free and you can create something yourself, you have an idea, and yes, maybe you make a lot more money than the guy that doesn't. Okay, that's just simply, the way it works. But at the same time, you further advance the living standards. And that's what the kitchen debate was about. He was showing Khrushchev how the modern kitchen was, whereas in Russia, the only innovation that ever took place was nuclear weapons for the government. That was it. The people were still living in the same way they were, 100 years before. You don't have somebody that creates a vacuum cleaner, maybe I can make some money. That would be a good idea. You're not allowed to think freely. So, I mean, that's what communism really is. I mean, I went behind the Berlin Wall before it fell, and I can tell you that I went there with a friend who, the day the wall went up, he happened to be walking on the right side of the street. He was like maybe 4 or 5 years old with his grandmother. So he ended up becoming American, but the rest of his family was trapped behind the wall. And we went there to go see them, and his cousin, she would speak freely when nobody was around. As soon as somebody came within shot of us, she would start going into the communist spiel that, oh, this is our government. They take such wonderful care of us. And another friend that lived in East Germany, when the wall fell, his father went and got his Stasi file. And he saw that all his friends were ratting on him. And he came home and he started punching holes in the wall. He thought his father was crazy. And he starts pulling out microphones. And to this day, his father refuses to ever speak to anybody other than family.
Wow.
So it's, you don't realize, but this whole thing that we're going through right now is the same thing. This cancel culture, going over, oh, somebody said something I don't like, and that was 20 years ago, so cancel them. I mean, this is exactly what was taking place in communism. You're destroying the right to speak freely, canceling anybody that you don't like. This is what we're going through.
I look at these kids with the Governor Youngkin in Virginia just gave the pen that signed off the mask, right? And she would not take it, and they expelled her 9 times. And I'm thinking, the Democrats have to be creating an entire underclass of young people that hate Democrats and the teachers union. There must be a huge groundswell of young people going, these people are stupid, it's sick, and we hate them. Am I wrong about that? Do you think that's what's going on?
Well, I would recommend looking at a book that was published in the 70s called Obedience to Authority. It was a study done by that was on it was Stanley Milgram who did it, and it was a question of the Nazis who their defense was they were just following orders. So what emerged was that, well, the Germans just must be different. And Milgram decided to create studies, and he would go to see if that was really true. And he took somebody off the street, and he had an actor in there, and they connect wires to him. And they said, well, you ask him these questions, and every time he's wrong, you got to, torture him. You got to keep, electric shocking him. And the guy would be screaming, oh, please don't do it anymore. I can't take it. I'm sorry, I have to do it. And he did a study on this, and it shocked the world, actually. But and he called it obedience to authority. And that if people are told to do something and they think the government is correct, they will do it. And it's not all of the people, fortunately, but a large people will do it. And so you see people riding around by themselves in a car with a mask on. It's like, hello. I mean, do you understand what this is even about? But that's the problem. And they do not understand human nature. And that's what, they think that this great reset, they can just force everybody to do this. And you just look at Canada. I mean, Trudeau is one of Schwab's young global leaders. And the worst countries are the ones that have graduated from his school. And it's, make everybody comply. If they don't, crush them to the ground. And this is what you see in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. It's throughout Europe. I mean, Schwab has gotten the head of Europe. She used to be on his board. The head of the ECB is on his board. The head of the IMF is on his board. He's very smart. And what he's been doing is strategically putting people that graduate from his school of authoritarianism, and he's sticking them in to control different governments. And he's been doing the same thing in the United States. And even, John Kerry. I mean, if you listen to what they say, when Trump was elected, it was evil, populism. When Biden's elected, it's democracy.
Yeah.
So, they play with the words. And, you had John Kerry even had the audacity to stand up, what we have to eliminate is populism. So you look in the 8 point for Schwab, what he wants to create is, besides the first one that's got everybody upset about, is you own nothing and be happy. He also has in there that the United States will be overthrown, and he has in there that be the end of democracy, but will retain the ideas of human rights. And he's, point blank, he's telling people what he's doing, but he really thinks this is the answer.
I want to circle back to this because you have your Socrates program. Listen, the program's never been wrong. And I wanted to tell people about the whole Florida thing. You moved to Florida because Socrates said, "Wow, Florida is going to be the place to be," and ding, correct, and many other correct predictions. I'm just going to give that one. But your Socrates program says this is not going to work. It's failing. Could you explain that it's failing? That this globalist New World Order Great Reset is failing, and why?
Well, like I said, with Marx, it at least made sense when serfdom ended and the people own nothing. Schwab is basically saying you'll own nothing and be happy. Is absurd, because what you're doing is you're creating a fake image that I'm going to relieve you of all your debt. You won't own credit card debt, student loan debt, your mortgage. You won't own anything. All right? But at the same time, what's he really doing? And he is basically, that's a front, because the government has gone to the point of no return.
Wow.
And what you have to understand here is that it's really the government that has to default. They have basically gone through everything that they followed Keynesian economics, and that's basically, you lower interest rates to stimulate the economy, you raise interest rates to suppress people from buying. That idea was okay in the 1930s. But today the government is the biggest borrower. So it no longer works, because if they raise interest rates to stop inflation, they only create more. The government doesn't reduce its spending. It just increases the cost of government. So we've completely blown every economic theory that everybody was ever taught in school, period. It just does not work. And that's the crisis that we have. And so Schwab has been able to get his foot in the door by saying, look, the way to do this is that we create this great reset. The government becomes more communist. It owns everything. And at that point, then you don't have to run for election, and you'll be just the head of state for the rest of your life. And that is what they like to hear. I've argued on the opposite side of the table in these meetings, and basically what I've said is that, look, you're going to default. This is it. It's no longer sustainable. But we create a coupon. We then take that and swap it for the bonds. The people then can take the coupon and only use it to invest in domestic stock. So therefore, anybody that wanted to start a business suddenly can do it. I mean, but small businesses, 70% that apply for loans are rejected, because the government's competing with them. Why should a bank give you a loan when I can get AAA guaranteed from the government, and there's no risk? So this is, the problem.
Is it going to get, I'm looking at the headlines as we do this. This is on late Friday afternoon. Ottawa police, with assault rifles are going after the Freedom Convoy. Is this going to get bloody? Is that what your Socrates program is showing you?
We're looking at more and more countries moving towards separation. I think, Trudeau is absolutely insane. He's just completely lost it. He's doing this very same thing that, for example, of Adolf Hitler. And I'm not talking about the Holocaust or something like that, but what people don't realize what Hitler did, he banned people from having accounts outside the country, tried to confiscate everybody's money. And because of his laws, that's why Switzerland created secret numbered accounts to protect people that were fleeing from Hitler. And here you have Schwab basically selling this idea that we can, just crush people and you'll succeed. And it's just absurd. But if you look at all the people that have graduated from his young global leaders, they're all absolutely horrible people. They're all authoritarian. They don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in human rights. And they create nonsense. I mean, sending people over after the truckers with guns is nuts. They did that in 1932 with the bonus army during the Great Depression, and that's basically why Hoover lost. They sent in the army to put down the veterans, and there were some that were shot and killed who were unarmed.
And you think this is going to get nasty, bloody, everywhere?
They're fighting for their life. This is Schwab's entire idea of how do we reach this panacea of communism. And those in power, like Trudeau, I mean, he won with even less than Hitler won, percentage of population. But under a parliamentary system, they get to band together and create these minority governments. And they bribe them. Okay, you come in, you support me, and I'll give you this. It's a horrible system, absolutely horrible.
So Trudeau is really in the minority, and boy, he's probably really in the minority now.
The question is, and look, even Texas has just found that there were 11,000 people on the rolls who were not even American in the last election. This is pretty standard.
They just took 400 some odd thousand votes off the rolls, and this was a Judicial Watch, and Tom Fitton just got North Carolina to take 400 and something plus thousand people off the rolls that shouldn't be on the voter rolls in North Carolina. That just happened.
Yeah, I mean, this is the way they rig elections. If you think you really honestly have the right to vote, it's questionable. And what our system, which is a republic, it's not a democracy. They even misrepresent that. A republic is you vote for one person and he basically runs the show for the whole state or whatever. Now the problem with that is that we have these party politics. So I could run for whatever locally, vote for me, and I'll do this for Red Tide or whatever. And I get to Washington and they go, okay, fine, that's very nice, but you vote according to the way we tell you. So you see these votes, it's always down party line. Very few will ever cross that because then they're persona non grata. And that's basically the way it is. So we don't, you basically just have to vote for a party at this stage. It doesn't matter what the guy says because he doesn't really have the right to even vote or do something along those lines.
How do you think the Canadian trucker thing is going to end? What's going to be the count for? What does your data say about that?
I think it's basically going to, further. The model turns. I think it's like the second week of April on Canada, and so it's probably going to get worse into that period of time. And this is only going to fuel the rise of separatist movements. And what he did in going with this emergency act, and all the banks went offline together. So, this is basically a shot across the bow. And international capital, Canada is not the place to put money.
Oh,
It's just you've in trying to get these truckers, he has basically destroyed the confidence of government in parking any money in Canada. Oh, that would be
Voilà,
safe
yeah.
versus Europe or whatever in war. Nothing's safe up there. I mean, he has this emergency act that he can just put in, and banks tell banks to freeze everybody's money, and there's no due process of law. He can simply say, "Well, I think that you're one of them, so just freeze all his accounts too." Where's the proof? Oh, you're not entitled to a trial.
oh boy. And so Canada's going to throw him off, throw him out. I mean, I got to be ultra liberal people going, whoa, this is not what I voted for. I mean, you think that I had one friend of mine in Canada because I think Trudeau's finished politically. He's done after all this. He showed us who he was. Do you think Trudeau is finished politically?
Yeah, I think that the biggest danger with this whole thing is that he's just follows the orders from the World Economic Forum. I mean, what would be fantastic would be to get a hold of all the phone calls and any text messages or emails between him and Schwab. Then you would see what I'm talking about. But he actually brags that he has other members in the cabinet there in Canada, and they all do what basically he has taught them.
Whew, this is going to have to get ugly because you can't vote that kind of stuff out.
No, they're clearly not willing to even negotiate. I mean, all Trudeau had to do was, yeah, okay, fine, no more vaccines, and we'll back off. He hasn't backed off of anything.
Yeah, they got 90% of people vaccinated, quote, experimental clot shot up in Canada. They want 100%. Of course, I can't believe these people, Trudeau has had these shots. I can't believe it. The cops don't have them. They don't make the police. There was a video out there. Did you get the shots? No. Were you required to get the shots? No. No.
Look, this is not everybody, can accept any kind of a vaccine. One guy that I know, his family, they get violently ill even with a flu shot. So not everybody's the same.
Well, we didn't need it. They cut off hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin because they wanted to give this emergency use. We didn't need this. We could have just used that. And that's what Dr. Michael Yaden from Pfizer said. We could have just used that. Also, Luc Montagnier. We could have just used hydroxychloroquine, zinc, Z-Pak, and ivermectin. We didn't need the shots. That's really the bottom line. We didn't need it.
The shots are basically, it's not so much on, putting microchips in you or something like that. But, it's more about showing are you one of the resistors, or are you going to be one of the sheep and follow whatever the government says? And that's the primary issue with this. But where their mistake is, I know people that got vaccinated only so they could keep a job, or one friend got vaccinated because their family was in Italy and they wanted to go visit them. It's not that they got it because they believed that COVID was going to kill them or something along those lines. So there's a fair amount of people that are vaccinated that didn't buy their shtick to begin with. They complied, but only because they were forced to.
I think that one of our interviews we were talking about this is back in November. You said your model said there's going to be a pretty good die-off in coming up in 2022, and what we found out was the insurance models from the insurance companies, One American, and the CEO blurted out, well, up 40%, and all the other insurance companies have the same problem, and the CDC even sees a 40% unexplained die-off in all death categories, which that's happened right when the vax came up. Are we going to get more and more sickness, illness, death out of this? That's what Cliff High his data is saying. We're going to keep getting people dying. This is, people falling down to comedy acts. Bob Saget, of course, they say it was a brain thing. Is your data showing a sickness and die-off with these shots in the next few years?
Yeah, I don't know if it's this vaccine. You also have to pay attention that, which I found very curious, was that Gates's companies went and got a vaccine approved for smallpox, which was supposed to have been cured. And what is it, 3-4 months later, suddenly it appears in Yemen. So look.
But you are seeing a bump in die-off. Socrates.
Yeah, I just don't necessarily say it's from COVID.
Or the vaccines.
But I mean, there are other diseases that are far more serious. COVID, I mean, it's just like the flu. I mean, my mother was, died at 99, and the doctors always said, look, they usually go during the flu season. That's when you should be careful. So it's just, something along those lines that you just have to, pay attention to. And so COVID is more or less the same thing. And I knew from the outset that this was all about a lie, mainly because when you had Bill Gates up there saying that we have to vaccinate the whole world and that will eliminate COVID, that's an outright lie. We can't cure the common cold or any coronavirus or the flu. Why? Because it also simultaneously exists in animals. And it will always have a reservoir to mutate and come back year after year after year. So one year we have the bird flu. Then it's the swine flu. They've already said that 40% of the deer have COVID. We're not getting rid of this. It will be with us now for forever. But it's the same more or less thing as the flu. And I say I know that this was very nefarious because Gates can't be that stupid. I mean, I remember asking in health class in high school, how come we can't cure the common cold and the flu? And they said because it coexists in animals. The only vaccine that ever worked to actually eliminate something was smallpox. And that was only because smallpox existed in humans only, period.
But what about the vaccines as Dr. Michael Yaden from Pfizer, and I got sources for this. So he works as executive at Pfizer, chief science officer, and he says he thinks the vaccines are for depopulation. He says that outright. I heard him say it. I have a video saved on my computer where Michael Yaden says that. Other people say the same thing. So does Luc Montagnier, who just died, incidentally. He was a groundbreaking work on HIV. He also says if you had 2 shots, Luc Montagnier, 2 shots in a booster, that you should check yourself for HIV. And there's a component of HIV. What about just the shots being the catalyst here for a lot of people think it's a depopulation device, and many people are going to get sick and die. Maybe not all at once, but that's what top medical people say. What do you say?
I would say the main studies that I saw on it out of England was that it lowered people's immune system so that they would be susceptible to other diseases. Whether or not this particular vaccine is the catalyst itself, or does it simply lower our immune system to affect us with other things? It's hard to say. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to speculate on all that sort of stuff. But
you are seeing a die-off. That's the one thing we can say. Socrates,
yeah. I mean,
is showing a die-off.
We're in a period of a rise in disease. Everything has a cycle to it. I mean, even the Black Plague has shown up in limited areas in China now. So, I mean, you got smallpox in Africa, you got Black Plague showing up in China. It could be one of those that spreads. It's who knows? But we just look at it from a cyclical standpoint, and they are also aligned with global cooling. And I mean, I live in Florida. This has been the coldest period I have ever seen in my life. I mean, 1 or 2 nights, yeah, it's cold, but this has been cold consistently for at least a couple weeks. I mean, I've never seen it this cold.
Wow.
So, I mean, you have to be careful that the more we end up in global cooling, that's, correlates to the rise in disease. And
Wow,
people then
that's amazing.
can't.
Socrates nailed that a rise in disease, a rise in death, die off, whatever you want to call it. But your program is, in, like you said, it's never wrong. That's kind of good, I guess, good information, but a little frightening information that your computer is showing a rise in die off.
It just depends upon you understand what's going on. That there is a cycle period that we're beginning to enter into. Was it this COVID? Look, I can tell you that I know an editor from the London Financial Times, and she had investigated COVID. There was a lab leak, etc. Put the whole thing together, and the FT wouldn't let her print it. She quit. I mean, so we're in this stage of cancel culture. The mainstream press is just no longer believable. Period. I mean, it's a joke. The whole thing is a joke. And what are they? They seem to be bought and paid for. And I can tell you that, for example, Schwab holds his January Davos meetings, but what doesn't get the press is in December, he holds a meeting for the press, generally in New York. And so you get all these heads and people that own the media, they all come, and they get this preview, and he is basically, greasing their palms to take on his agenda.
Wow.
And he's very, very smart. He's not a front man. Gates has been attracted to him, and so has Soros, but they are not the original source. I mean, Schwab is the one who's put together this network, and for whatever reason, the politicians, they've all signed on to it.
Oh boy, howdy! The Fed had an emergency meeting, and I know you know about that. You know all about a lot of things, but the economy, particularly because you counsel on it globally. But no, they had an emergency meeting on Valentine's Day and nothing. I mean, they had an emergency meeting on Christmas Day of 2018 and turned the markets around. Had a big deal. Some people say we're close that the Fed is close of completely losing control of everything. But what's your appraisal of the Fed, and are we close to losing and collapsing the economy?
I wouldn't say collapsing the economy, but we've lost control of it, yes. What you have to understand is that the ECB lowered rates to negative in 2014. They've been unable to stimulate it since that period of time with low interest rates, even negative for that matter. And so that's been a joke. Then you had China warning their own provinces and companies, do not borrow in US dollars. So you have a tremendous amount of debt that issued in US dollars by foreign governments, companies, etc. So you had China also going directly to the Fed and asking them, please do not raise rates, because if you do, you're going to create an emerging market debt crisis. And so as it's a double-edged sword here. As Ukraine becomes inevitably Russia will be forced in, because the West just keeps slapping Putin's face, and it doesn't, they don't negotiate, they don't learn to shut up. I think they really are praying for Putin to invade, so they have something else to scream about, because COVID is dying. But as you have the crisis with Ukraine, then the capital flows into the United States. You've had about $5 billion a month coming into the U.S. equity markets from overseas.
That's why we're getting these all-time highs.
Yeah, and so you have these people saying, "Oh, the chart it's high. We got to drop 50%." It's what they don't look at is that there are international capital flows, and so the higher the dollar goes, the greater the risk is of an emerging debt crisis. The emerging debt crisis only sends more money into the United States. So it's a real mess, and the Fed is beginning to realize it has no ability to stop inflation. It's like I said, if they raise interest rates to stop inflation, the government spends more. Particularly the Biden administration has just been like on a spending spree. I mean, it's just completely nuts. So they have undermined the Federal Reserve, and the Fed is the only one that is independent of all the central banks. And it's I know people will say, oh no, that's not true. But if you go back to 1951, the Federal Reserve was ordered by the Roosevelt administration to maintain interest rates and government bonds at par.
And not 51, because Roosevelt was dead by then. It was 41?
Well, I mean, he initially started it.
Okay.
And then under 51, the Korean War was coming. And the White House said, look, we want you to continue that policy, and the Fed refused. So the Fed basically rejected that, and so interest rates, the Fed just started dealing with interest rates, and not listening to the White House. You can Google that one up. I mean, you can see it was basically what happened in 1951. But so the Fed has been really independent, and ever since the White House can't direct it to you do this or you do that or whatever, they can't really do that. And people want to blame the Fed for everything, but the Fed does not control the fiscal side.
Congress does.
That's Congress. It's spending,
yeah.
And there's no obligation of the Federal Reserve to buy the U.S. government debt at all, whereas the ECB is so stuck, it's crazy. Whatever they have bought since 2014, they cannot allow it to even mature. They have to roll it. Whereas the Fed, its balance sheet has expanded and contracted. And the Fed even came out and said, all right, fine, what we bought, we're just going to let it mature, and that's it. The ECB can't do that. So it's just crazy. The whole thing is just crazy.
So what, while we're on the economy, and I want to talk about the election and what's going on geopolitically at the end of the year, but
there is a message for you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So what's going to happen with the economy between now and election day or the end of the year? We're going to get inflation big, and so should people just count on big inflation?
Yeah, there's not much you're going to be able to do at this stage in the game. The Fed is not going to be able to stop inflation. It's not going to. It's impossible.
So if you're close on a battery, buy a new one. If you're close on tires, spend your money. Is that what you're telling people?
That's what inflation is. People will not buy something if they think it's going to be cheaper next month. But they will buy it when there's a shortage. Well, I better buy some extra now. Or the same thing with property. As soon as they start seeing mortgage rates run up, they go out and they lock it in. Why should they lock in if the rates keep going down?
So do you think rates will go up and property will take a hit?
Pardon me?
Do you think rates will go up some? Because, the 10 year's at, 2% now around, plus or minus. But, that's not, what a year ago was 0.4%. But do you think rates will continue to go up on their own? The Fed be able to stop that, or what's going to happen with real estate?
The Fed can't stop it. I mean, the whole thing about quantitative easing, what that was that the long-term rates, which the Fed cannot set, the idea is that they would buy in the longer-term bonds, 10 years, 30 years, to reduce the supply, and in theory, they would lower the interest rate. All right. The Fed can only set the short-term rate. That's it. They don't have the power to say, all right, 30-year, we're fixing it at 3% or whatever. They can't do that. So that's what the whole quantitative easing was all about.
So let me ask you this. So I listen, I got a general studies degree, so you're way smarter than me. And you do this globally. But so we're going to get rising inflation, and we're going to get a rising interest rate, and we could get rising, even if the Fed doesn't raise rates, we're going to get longer mortgage rates anyway, and rising inflation, that's a lock?
Yeah, because what happens is that right now you have capital has been more inclined to go into buying mortgages than government debt, because they feel that they at least have collateral. If governments default or simply declare like an emergency act like Trudeau in Canada, you're out. That's it. And that's what Trudeau doesn't realize. He's playing with fire here. Once you lose the confidence in the banking system and in the debt of Canada, it's Katie bar the door. That's it. He's really destroying the Canadian economy.
Ooh. So that's why you think he's finished politically, because by the time.
Yeah, I mean that's also why this whole Schwab thing isn't working. It's not going to work. We're not as naive internationally in capital as we were when the 1914 October Revolution in Russia was. I mean, you can't compare the two periods. We are, we now. I mean, there wasn't even Keynesian economics at that point.
Yeah. All
right. So it's a completely different mindset, and I mean, the amount of money that we advise on in major global funds is well into the trillions. I mean, I get to see what these people are really concerned about.
Well, what's I guess they're concerned that their bonds and their money could go poof, right? I mean, they got to be freaked out. They got to be scared.
Yeah, there's a lot of them that are. We had one major pension fund that sold all government bonds, and S&P went in and said, "Oh, you're taking on more risk," and they said, "Look, we did our studies. Armstrong is right. And people that end up defaulting are governments."
Oh my God!
And we get nothing back.
So the government pension system, poof, bye bye, sorry,
yeah,
sorry, that's going to go away.
If government goes bust, you can't go down to the National Gallery and start lifting Picassos,
That's right.
If General Motors goes bust, it goes into bankruptcy, the assets are all sold, at least you get something back. A government going bust, you get nothing back.
So government pensions are going to be destroyed.
It all depends upon the individual pension fund. But yes, that's part of the whole agenda why they have, they're putting in the guaranteed, basic income. And that's to replace the pension funds that they default on.
Oh my gosh. That's pretty much it.
Europe is a disaster. But even Social Security, 100% is invested in U.S. government bonds.
Oh, that could just go poof.
The U.S. is in the best shape. All right. Europe is a complete disaster. Canada is not that far behind. And the U.S. has the biggest economy, and because we are really a capitalistic system, we have done much better than the more regulation you put in, like in Europe, it becomes a disaster.
So I'm not going to hold it up. The latest Congresswoman, 30 Democrat Congress people are not running for re-election. Evidently, they're going to take their campaign bribes. I mean, campaign donations, and they're going to run, and they're not going to waste them, right? So what Can you handicap what this fall is going to look like in 2020? Are they going to be able to cheat their way out, and evidently much bigger than they did the last two times? Are the Democrats going to be able to cheat their way out, or are the Democrats retiring and taking the money and running? Are they signaling you're not going to be able to cheat this out? What's going to happen this fall?
There's a number of people, even on the Democratic side, that are just totally fed up, and they don't agree with this agenda, and that's why they're stepping down.
Oh, really?
And I hear it also from some Republicans. And I have one good friend who was a major chief of staff. I said, maybe, if you stayed there, maybe, you can help. And he says, no, I can't take it anymore. And so unfortunately, a lot of the good people are leaving. And I mean, I had a conversation just a few days ago and with somebody who's running for Congress, and they're asking me, gee, what can we do with Ukraine? Could you maybe help get involved in negotiations or whatever? And I said, look, what do you expect me to do? I can't do anything. I mean, you got Biden in the White House who doesn't shut up. How do you? I mean, just put it this way. He rejected absolutely everything that Putin asked for. And one of them was that Ukraine would not enter NATO. Now, because he's got the troops on the border, everybody's abandoned Ukraine, closing embassies, get out of there, whatever. They have already basically neglected, Ukraine. It's not going to be entered into NATO. I mean, so this is very strange to me, because why would you don't negotiate with somebody like that and just reject absolutely everything they ask for? I mean,
Putin's going to get what he wants anyway.
By sheer force. I mean, and in all honesty, he's not really that wrong.
No, it'd be like putting, Mexico with Russia.
When Russia was trying to put in missiles in Cuba,
right?
It was a big thing. We take them, we put them in right up against his border. I think he's legitimate saying pull back to 1997 lines. Is that so horrible? I mean, we don't need a nuke, sitting 10 miles away from the border. It's just crazy.
So what do you think?
Submarine off the side, and he can take out 3 or 4 cities in a matter of minutes. I mean, it's. I don't understand what the point is, other than you're deliberately trying to create war. That's it. They want him to go in, and I think he's only going to step in and take the Russian areas. And what you have to understand here is that Putin is probably the most respected world leader today. His approval rating is 65% in Russia.
Wow.
All right. Who even has more than 40% in the West? Nobody. I mean, it's debatable who's lower between, Biden and Trudeau.
And of course, that's the best they can make it look phony polls. So in reality, it might be 20% or 18% or.
But the problem is when you slap somebody in the face like that, and you're then forcing him to do something. All right, because if he doesn't do something, he's going to look weak, and his polls will go down domestically. All right, so he has to, at this stage in the game, appear to do something. And what he came out in his speech was very critical words, and people don't often understand this geopolitically, but he said, we will defend Russian people regardless of where they are. Donetsk is probably 90 to 95% Russian. Eastern Ukraine are mostly Russians. Crimea, we're all Russians. I didn't know any, Ukrainians there. All right, they would go down there for a holiday to go to the beach. But those areas were always Russian. simply because the border was created during the Soviet Union, and say, okay, fine, we'll allocate Crimea to be administered from Ukraine, doesn't mean it's Ukraine's territory. You know, from the very outset, I warned. I said you should split Ukraine according to the language. Period. That's the culture. And now what's made things worse, which the West doesn't want to report, is that Ukraine, because of Yanukovych, was from the East. And he could not even speak Ukrainian without an accent. He sounds like a fool most of the time. So they ended up passing a language law, which now bars anybody from running for office there or as a head of state who cannot speak Ukrainian. So that's what Putin's talking about, that they're basically writing off all the human rights of people in Donetsk.